Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest both hours today, and it's open forum. So if you'd like to dial, now's the time to start, 888-318-7884. Open forum is open to anyone on the planet Earth. If you can dial a phone, you can call 888-318-7884. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. I got a stack of books here. A Daily Defense is one of his books. The Fathers Know Best, that's about the Church Fathers. Teaching with Authority, that's about church doctrine and confusion around which doctrines are more or less significant than the others, how you understand what the church really teaches. And then the latest, The Bible is a Catholic Book. Jimmy also, of course, proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hi, Jimmy.
Hey, I see that you've got colorful sticky notes as bookmarks in Teaching with Authority. That suggests that you, or at least someone, has actually cracked that one open. That's awesome.
Yes, I have indeed cracked it open. Yeah, it's funny because you... I guess as a Catholic, you learn certain things about doctrine and dogma and all that. Not all of it is either precise or in every case even correct, but you just kind of go along with your, I thought, for example, that encyclicals have a certain significance that they don't always have. And one of the things that you continually point out is it's not just about what the document is. It's also about what the nature of each statement in the document is. So it's kind of fun to find out about how this all actually works.
Yeah, and it's not only in Catholic circles that people, hear things. I mean, no matter what faith tradition you come from, you hear certain things that are just part of the ethos that, you absorb as a result of being part of a religious community. And people in every religious community generally don't build their religious views one doctrinal atom at a time.
Right. Yeah.
They pick it up to some extent by osmosis from the people around them.
But this is a very helpful one. Among all your books, also very popular book, the most recent one, The Bible is a Catholic Book. Already the phone's starting to fill up. Let's see, we got, I was going to say how many lines we got open, but I can't because we don't have any open. 888-318-7884, the number. I feel like let's just go to the phones and see what the questions are today.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
All right, let's go to Odessa, Texas with our friend Devonte. Hang on a second, Devonte. You there with us, Devonte?
Yes, I am. How are you guys?
I'm very well. You know why I call you our friend?
Why is that?
Because we've been talking with you quite a bit lately. It's starting to feel like you're our
I
friend.
appreciate that very much.
Yeah, well, it's always nice to talk with you. Go ahead. What do you got for Jimmy today?
Yes, sir. So what is the role of the Treasury of Merit with the giving of indulgences?
Well, so we'll define both of those terms real briefly, just for folks who may not be familiar with them. An indulgence is an occasion where the church intervenes using the authority that Christ has given it to help ameliorate the consequences of a sin that's already been forgiven. Because even after we're forgiven for our sin, there are lingering consequences. The book of Hebrews talks about that, how even for Christians, God scourges every son whom he receives. So, there are consequences after we've sinned, even once we've been forgiven, the eternal consequence, so we'll be in heaven. And Christ gave the church the authority to intervene in the process of healing after sins, and an indulgence is a case where that happens. The thing that the church draws upon in intervening in this way is sometimes called the Treasury of Merits, and the Treasury of Merits principally consists of what Christ himself did, because he paid an infinite price on the cross. And so as a result, the Treasury of Christ's merits is infinite. God has also chosen to associate us with the work of redemption, though. Now, we can't pay for our own sins, but we can help by doing things that please God and that can help other people heal from their sins. And so there's a sense in which other things that people have done that have pleased God also can be drawn upon in this way. It would be a little complex at the moment to try to give a full course in the discussion of indulgences, but if you Google a primer on indulgences and my name, Jimmy Akin. You'll get a document coming up that contains the biblical basis for these concepts. And also there's a companion piece called Myths About Indulgences. So if you Google Myths About Indulgences and Jimmy Akin, that'll provide some additional perspective. Also, I cover both of these in my book, The Drama of Salvation. And so, Devontae, I don't know if you already have The Drama of Salvation, but if you don't, why don't we see if we can send you a copy?
Oh, that sounds great. Devontae, hang on. And let me just write a note here to Annie, who's running the phones today. And if you would like to get that book, just hang on. We'll get your address and we'll send you a copy of Jimmy Akin's book, The Drama of Salvation. Thanks, Devontae. Let's go to an anonymous caller now in Sacramento, California, watching on YouTube. Anonymous, are you there with us? Hi, Anonymous. Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Anonymous. Oh, I got excited. I thought I heard some action, but not. We'll come back to you. Let's go to Richard in San Pablo, California, listening on the Catholic Answers live app. Richard, I'm hoping you're there, Richard. You got a question for Jimmy?
Sure do. So I have a RCI student, and she had asked about the different types of Bibles, the differences between them, and I didn't have a quick answer to her way to describe it.
Okay, well, there are a bunch. So the most fundamental difference between different types of Bibles deals with what books they have in them. And if you're looking at a Protestant Bible, it's likely to have one set of books. If you're looking at a Catholic Bible, it's going to have a few additional books. If you're looking at an Eastern Orthodox Bible, it'll have a few more than that. So it's going to depend on what faith community you're a part of, exactly what books you'll find in a Bible. Then there's the question of the text of those books, and that's in most of the Bibles that people get, it will be a translation into their native language, like maybe English, although it is possible to get Bibles that are in the original languages, which in the case of the Old Testament is Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and in the case of the New Testament is Greek. So you can get original language Bibles, but most of the time what people are looking for are translations. There are different styles of translation. They kind of fall along a spectrum. Towards one end of the spectrum, you have translations that try to go more word for word in how they translate things. Sometimes these are called literal translations. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you have translations that don't try to stick to the words in exactly the same words in exactly the same order as much, but instead they try to translate the thought into your language in a way that's easier to understand. And these are sometimes called dynamic translations. It's really a matter of personal preference, which you like. Some people like the more literal translations because they preserve more aspects of the original language, even though that makes them a bit harder to understand. Other people prefer the more dynamic translations because they're a little bit easier to understand, even though they do omit certain aspects of the original language that otherwise could show up in the translation. Beyond that, it's a question, beyond the text of the books of the Bible, it's then a question of what additional aids are there to help you as you study the Bible. Many Bibles have footnotes that will clarify or try to clarify various things in the text. Some of them have introductions to the different books in the Bible that give you some background on, who wrote this book and when was it written and what kind of circumstances does it try to address. There can be all kinds of different study aids that you'll find in Bibles, especially ones that are flagged as being study Bibles. That can include not only notes and introductions, but timelines and essays and maps and cross-references and all kinds of different things.
I hope that that's helpful to you. I appreciate the call. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Jimmy Akin, Open Forum, right here on Catholic Answers. I hope you have recovered from last week's Focus interview with a real-life exorcist. If you're still freaked out by that one, we started this week with an episode on blessings with Father Hugh Barber. That should help you feel better. But on Wednesday of this week, we have our most controversial episode ever. Here's the setup. Lots of Catholic media personalities have been suggesting that Pope Francis is a bad pope. So we got a bunch of clips from their shows and we asked an expert on the papacy, what if they're right? We're not trying to pick a fight with anyone, but we got into some really frank discussions about what some of these well-known media personalities are saying. Catholic Answers Focus, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Watch it on YouTube or listen anytime at CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Hey Alexa, how many ways can I get EWTN?
You can get EWTN on television, via cable and satellite, on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, and Google Play. You can get EWTN radio in your car on Sirius XM Channel 130 and on the go on any mobile device with the EWTN app. And here's the best news. Now you can get EWTN's great programming on Me.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and our guest both hours today is Jimmy Akin. It's open forum. We are open to your call, whoever you are and wherever you are, 888-318-7884. You most certainly don't have to be a Catholic to call, although every single one of our Catholic brothers and sisters is welcome. You don't even have to be a Christian to call anybody. 888-318-7884. And of course, Jimmy is very open to a very wide range of questions. Before we go back to the phones, I got to remind you the store-wide sale is on right now at shop.catholic.com. Everything is on sale, including the School of Apologetics courses. Head over to shop.catholic.com today and check out the deals. Let's go back to Sacramento and see if our anonymous caller is with us. Anonymous, you there with us?
Yeah, I am. Sorry. I had it on mute.
I do it all the time. No problem, Anonymous. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yeah. Can Catholics pray the Chotki from Orthodox?
There's nothing in principle in the prayers that I'm aware of associated with that tradition that is problematic from a Catholic point of view. And so you can say any prayer you want that doesn't express false doctrine or contain anything immoral. And saying the Jesus prayer with a different set of beads is perfectly moral. So I don't see an issue with it. Now, there may be some versions that could be problematic, but in terms of the devotion in general, there's not a problem that I'm seeing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anonymous. Appreciate the
No
call.
problem.
Who's up next? Let's go to Valparaiso, Nebraska, listening on 102.7 FM. That's Spirit Catholic Radio in Nebraska. Is Jeff. Jeff, have you got a question for Jimmy Akin?
Yes, I do. I have a question about abortion, and it's a kind of a two-part question because I was talking to somebody else over with it today, and I was wondering if there's what vaccines, the flu vaccines, have what is it known for having aborted fetuses for the, I guess, the starting out cellular, or is it
cell lines
makeup?
Yeah,
cell lines.
All right. So the question then, Jeff, is can you take these vaccines that may have been manufactured using the remains of or cells that are derived from aborted fetuses? Is that's basically the question, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Jimmy.
So it's important just for people who may not be aware that what we're talking about here are not ongoing abortions that are being used to produce new batches of the vaccine. There are various cell lines that are used as part of medical research that ultimately go back to miscarriages or deliberate abortions that were committed in the past. And those are over and done with. So it's not like they're killing a new baby to make your dose. This is something that involves a historical sin, but it doesn't mean an ongoing one. And consequently, Catholic medical moral experts have looked at this question and have said that it is in principle possible, since there's not an ongoing sin, to use vaccines that were originally developed in this way. But there are also concerns about that because you don't want to incentivize people to continue this type of research. If you'd like more information about all that, actually it's been discussed a bit by the Pontifical Academy for Life and the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in some of their documents, but you can find documents dealing with it more specifically and directly on the website of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. That's ncbcenter.org, NCB for National Catholic Bioethics, ncbcenter.org. They'll have material on that, and I know we've discussed it numerous times here on our pro-life biomedical open forums.
Thanks, Jeff. Hope that was helpful to you. Let's go to New York City. Austin, watching on YouTube in New York City. You are next. Go ahead, Austin, with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, my question is, so in the New Testament, Jesus says the Father is greater than I, and I'm assuming that's because of his human nature. So I wanted to know if like the Holy Spirit was also higher than him, and if he's like somehow, if Jesus is higher than himself somehow, since he's also like God of himself.
So I understand the issue that you're thinking through here. I tend, when Jesus says the Father is greater than I, some people think that he's speaking in that, he's using that language because he's speaking in his capacity as a human, which he is a human, but he's also God. And you can take it that way, in which case the Father, speaking of the Father, you know, as divine, because the Father is divine, is greater than Jesus's human nature. So is the Holy Spirit, and so is Jesus's own divine nature. So, you know, you could look at it that way. My own inclination is to look at it a bit differently. Instead of talking about who has which nature, because all three of the persons of the Trinity have a divine nature and Jesus has a human nature, my own inclination is to look at this a bit differently, because even within the order of the persons of the Trinity, there is a distinction in how they're sequenced. The Father is what's referred to as in Greek, it's the arche of the Trinity, the source or origin of the Trinity, from which the other two persons proceed eternally. So the Father eternally, outside of time, begets the Son, and the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father through the Son. And so because this is outside of time, there was never a time when the Son didn't exist, and there was never a time when the Holy Spirit didn't exist, but they do proceed from the Father in this way. And so there's a sequence to their order. And that's one of the reasons why we refer to the Father as the Father and the Son as the Son, because fathers are the origin of their sons. And so since the first person of the Trinity is the origin of the second person of the Trinity, this Father-Son language is appropriate. Now, having said that, within the order of even just a human family, there is a difference in the roles of fathers and sons. And within a single human family, the father can be said to be greater than his son. That doesn't mean they're different in nature. They're not. They're both human beings. If you have a father and his grown-up son, they're both men, they're both adults, they both have the same nature, they both have equal dignity in that sense. But within the order of the family, the father could be said to be greater than the son. And so my suspicion is that's what Jesus is talking about here. He's not talking about having a different nature, that, oh, well, I've got this little bitty human nature compared to my Father's infinite divine nature, because he also has an infinite divine nature. So I tend to think that this is more about the order of the persons within the Trinity and the roles that they play within the Trinity, which is why Jesus consistently presents himself as coming to earth to do the Father's will, just like a human son might be given a mission to perform by his Father, and then he goes to do his Father's will.
Thank you. I appreciate that question, Austin. I hope that that was a helpful answer. We go now to Georgetown, Guyana, where I was so delighted to get that call from William the other day. First call we've ever taken from Georgetown, and I believe it is William again. William, are you there with us?
Yes, I am.
Well, thank you for calling again. Happy to have your call here. Your question for Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy. I'm a Catholic who got himself into a Protestant group, and I became very good friends with them. And there was a little strange situation in there when I was apparently prophesied to 4 times by 2 different people. And my question is, does God still speak to people through prophecy?
Okay.
Well, God does still sometimes speak to people through prophecy. That's quite true. The Catholic Church recognizes that private revelation is ongoing, and so God does sometimes give people a vision or an audible voice or something like that that gives them information to help them live out the Christian faith. That's very far, though, from saying that every single occasion where someone claims to be prophesying is an actual one where that's happening. There are a lot of situations where people are imagining that they're receiving a prophecy when in fact they're not. There are even cases where people hoax receiving a prophecy when in fact they know that they have not received one. And there are situations where they may be in contact with a supernatural entity like a spirit that tells them something, but it may not be a spirit that's come from God. One of the things we have warnings about in Scripture is we should not trust all of the spirits because some of them lie, some of them are demons. And therefore, when a person thinks that they've received a revelation, it needs to be tested. This is something that St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5. He says, don't despise prophesying, but test everything and hold fast to what is good. And so there needs to be a sifting process. If someone claims to give you a prophecy, it needs to be tested to see whether or not it's really coming from God or whether it's not. And that's all the more the case, the more consequential the prophecy is. The more implications it would have for your life, the more rigorous that testing needs to be. And if you'd like information about how to do that kind of testing, I'd suggest you check out a few episodes of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. I've done one specifically on how the church evaluates private revelation, so you could type in Jimmy Akin Mysterious World Private Revelation and check that out. I've also done episodes on particular revelations where I go through and I apply the principles to do the testing, and you could check some of those out as well.
Thank you very much, William. I appreciate the call. I hope we will continue our conversation with you. We'll get to continue our conversation with you is what I meant to say. Thanks again. We're going to go now to South Dakota, where I don't have a name on this caller. Jennifer. Jennifer, you got a question for Jimmy Akin?
Yeah, hi. Okay, so I am not currently Catholic. I was raised LCMS Lutheran, but my boyfriend is Catholic, so I've done a bunch of research and looking into the faith over the last 2 years or so. And one thing I still kind of struggle with is relics and the veneration of them and what their importance is, or why Catholics do it, or where they kind of got that from, where it started, and just the why.
Why all this relic stuff, Jimmy?
Well, it ultimately goes back to something that's built into human nature. And so in one sense, veneration of relics is as old as humanity, because humans have an inbuilt, and this is a human universal, it appears in every time and culture, we have an inbuilt sense that when someone dies, we need to treat their remains with some form of reverence. And this leads to customs like burying people, or cremating them, or doing something with their bodies. We don't just throw their bodies out in the street. There may be times where in times of a mass death situation, there's no alternative, but in normal times, we don't want to do that. We want to care for them properly. And there's more to say about that, but we'll say it on the other side of the break.
Jennifer, can you hang on for just a few seconds?
Okay.
All right, hang on. We'll get back with Jimmy finishing up his answer for you on relics, and then we will continue with our open forum, both hours today with Jimmy Akin here on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
If you spend any time on Twitter, Facebook, or mainstream media, you're probably familiar with the litany of slogans that skeptics employ to rescue you from the foolish belief that God exists. The constant onslaught seems to leave people with the idea that they have no alternative but to embrace atheism. How can a Christian respond? In One Less God Than You, John DeRosa breaks down 20 of the most common atheist challenges and shows you how to craft effective answers. Atheism is more aggressive and widespread than ever. Read One Less God Than You and prepare yourself to respond with the joyful truth that God is real. To get your copy of One Less God Than You, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
How did you propose to your spouse?
Was it more traditional or a little creative?
That's what we'll talk about tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Jennifer in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, listening on 94.5 FM Real Presence Radio, is on the line with us with a question about why we Catholics venerate relics. Jennifer, are you still there with us?
Yep.
All right. Jimmy, why do we venerate relics?
So, as I was indicating before the break came along, humans have an instinct that God built into us to treat the remains of other human beings with a special form of respect. You know, we don't just throw their bodies out in the street when they die. Every culture has some way of reverencing these relics, reverencing these bodies, and dealing with them. In some cultures, it's burial in the ground. In some cultures, it's cremation. In some cultures, it's what's known as a sky burial. But regardless of the form, there's always some way of reverencing them. We also do things like putting up tombstones and monuments and in some cases statues and things like that. And when people go to a graveyard, especially one, you know, where their relatives are buried, they show a special reverence at the graveside. You know, if you go to your, I don't know, hopefully not yet, Jennifer, but if you've lost a parent or a grandparent or someone close to you, you go to their grave, you know, you show respect when you're at their grave. And that's essentially what Catholics do with relics of the saints. It's just a different expression of this universal human tendency. And so just like different groups of humans do show their respect for human remains in different ways, especially those who are close to them, their family members, we Catholics show, and other Christians, Orthodox do this as well and so forth, so do other Eastern Christians. We show respect for the remains of departed members of our Christian family, especially those who are notably holy in a special way, because they're even closer and were in life even closer to God than most of us are, and so they're worthy of extra respect.
Now, Jennifer, this is all new to you. I just wonder if that answer was helpful. Do you need a follow-up?
No, that definitely helps. I haven't had it explained that way before, so thank you.
Well, you're very welcome, and I hope you will continue to call as questions come up. Appreciate the call. It's open forum today. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of The Bible is a Catholic Book, among many other books, and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Up next is TJ in Needville, Texas, watching on YouTube. TJ, you got a question for Jimmy?
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
My question is, when you are trying to discern whether something is sinful or not, and you go to read through various theologians and authoritative figures around you, and there's a conflict in opinions between various authoritative voices, how do you discern which is the right way and the wrong way?
So it'll depend. One distinction that I'll make is what I'm reading an official church document or not? Does it represent actual church teaching? And even beyond, is it a document issued by the church? I need to discern, is it a teaching document? Because not every document is meant to be something that communicates doctrine. But what I'll try to do, kind of as my first line of recourse, is say, okay, am I reading something that is doctrinally authoritative or not? Or am I reading something that is an opinion that has been formulated either by a bishop or a theologian or something like that? And if what I'm reading is an opinion, then my inclination is to try to think through the issue myself and say, okay, what are the arguments that are being proposed, and are those arguments plausible or not? If I'm not able to assess that, and a lot of folks, not being moral theologians, aren't necessarily in a position to assess that, but if I'm not able to, then we arrive at a situation that actually there's been quite a bit of discussion about in the history of Catholic thought, because you would have situations arise where you've got, even hundreds of years ago, you'd have some Catholic moral theologians taking one perspective and other Catholic theologians taking another perspective. And how do you sort out which is the way you need to proceed if, for you've got to get this question settled because you need to know how to act in your own life? Well, there are a couple of extremes that have been identified, both of which have been judged wrong. One of the extremes is called rigorism. And rigorism says you cannot, if you have a safe alternative and a less safe alternative, like do this or don't do this, you can only do the less safe alternative if you're either absolutely sure or really, really confident that the less safe alternative is correct. Laxism is the opposite of that. Laxism says that you can go ahead and do the less safe thing unless you are really, really, really sure that it's wrong. The correct approach, therefore, tends to be somewhere in the middle. And there have been different schools of thought that have been discussed over the course of time. They have fancy names in Catholic moral theology like probabilism, equiprobabilism, and probabiliorism, and compensationism. But what they involve doing is looking at the relevant circumstances and looking at the state of opinion among Catholic moral theologians. And if I had to boil it down obviously I could give us a little mini course in all of this, but if I boiled it down, if there's a significant division of opinion and it seems relatively equally balanced between theologians of one perspective and theologians of another, providing they're all Orthodox faithful Catholics, we're not talking about dissenters, then if one has a pressing need to act, one can go ahead and act on whichever view seems most advantageous, even though it's not absolutely clear which one is to be preferred.
I hope that is helpful to you, TJ. Appreciate the call. Our number here, 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and it's open forum, and the phones have just been staying full. That's why I just keep going quickly from call to call, but you are welcome to give it a try throughout this hour and next hour. Jimmy will be with us, 888-318-7884. Heading to South Africa now, watching on YouTube is Ryan. Ryan, are you there with us?
Yes, I am.
Well, happy to have you. Your question for Jimmy.
Yes. So my question is about. So I'm currently exploring the Catholic faith and considering becoming Catholic, and something that I have trouble understanding is purgatory, and more specifically the treasury of merit. From reading the Catechism, it seems a little bit unclear to me about if there's a specific sort of mechanism that is prescribed for us to understand it, by which I mean it doesn't seem as though it's necessarily prescribed to be a penal substitution, for example. So it seems to me that it might be open to the interpretation that the treasury of merit and our sort of purgatory isn't necessarily a penal substitution, but possibly the fact that we're meditating on the good deeds of the saints, and that helps us to become purified. So my question is sort of, is that a valid interpretation? Is there a more orthodox interpretation of how exactly the treasury of merit works? Because the Catechism doesn't seem to be super clear on that to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess to answer the question, I need to approach the history of the doctrine of purgatory at least briefly first. The New Testament, the Old Testament as well, but the New Testament contains language that is penal in nature, meaning it involves punishment. Like we said earlier in this episode, the book of Hebrews talks about how God scourges every son whom he receives. And there are other, places where this punishment or penal language is used in terms of how God deals with us. And so one of the things that has happened down through the course of history is one model of how purgatory works is a penal model, where people are punished for their sins in order to satisfy God's justice. Even though the eternal penalty has been remitted, still it was, God would view it as, okay, it's still fitting they receive some punishment, just like if we have a child that's disobeyed, the child needs to learn their lesson, and so we'll go ahead and punish the child even though we've forgiven them, because they need to learn their lesson, let's say, or justice needs to be satisfied. And so that's led to what some have called the satisfaction model of purgatory, which is essentially a penal model. On the other hand, there are other aspects of the language that the New Testament and the Bible uses that suggest something different. If you look at the same passage in Hebrews where it says God scourges every son whom he receives, it makes a comparison to a human father and says, well, look, our human fathers disciplined us according to their pleasure, but God disciplines us for our own good. And that could be understood as saying, well, look, a human father may sometimes discipline because that's his pleasure. I mean, he's mad at you and he wants to punish you. But that's not why God does it. God disciplines us for our own good. And the result of that is growth in holiness. And so this has led to another understanding of how purgatory might work that's known as the sanctification model, that would hold that to the extent purgatory does involve suffering, the purpose of that suffering is to help us grow in holiness by losing our disordered attachments to things, that would distract us from God and so forth. So it's essentially, it does involve suffering, but it's a medicinal function that suffering is performing. God's not punishing us for some other reason. We should understand these punishments in terms of their medicinal effect, not some other effect. And this sanctification model has been gaining ground in the last 50 years, let's say, in Catholic circles. It's always been there to one degree or another, but by 1992, when the Catechism was released, you had these two models. You had language supporting both of the models in the Catechism, and it wasn't really clear how they were meant to sit together. The Catechism didn't try to resolve the issue one way or another. It just presented both types of language when describing purgatory. After the Catechism was released in 1999, John Paul II gave an audience on purgatory, and in the audience, he basically conflated the two models. And he said that even though we've traditionally used this language of temporal punishments to refer to what happens in purgatory, those punishments must always be understood as part of God's merciful justice, not just his justice, but his merciful justice that causes us and leads us to grow in holiness. And so he seemed to say that the punishment language needs to be understood in terms of the sanctification model. And then by the time you get to Pope Benedict XVI's encyclical in the early 2000s, Spe Salvi, on Christian hope, he focuses exclusively on the sanctification model and the sanctification language, and doesn't even mention temporal punishments. So it seems to me that how purgatory is understood has been in a kind of flux, with church authorities leaning more towards the sanctification model. And that would suggest, to get to your question, Ryan, that would suggest that we would tend to understand the treasury of merits in some more personalistic way, rather than simply an accounting procedure. It would involve drawing upon the things that people have done and that have pleased God in a more existential, personal way that performs healing on individuals, rather than just a penal or judicial or legislative shifting of numbers from one column to another.
Ryan, appreciate the call. I have to go to a break. I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you so much for the call. Carlo's book, Purgatory is for Real, that examines quite a bit about purgatory, is about to be out. In South Africa, you could probably get the electronic copy. I don't know about how the printed copy will do getting to you, but I just wanted to suggest it to you. You might take a look over at the shop at shop.catholic.com and see about getting Carlo's book, Purgatory is for Real. We'll be right back with more Jimmy Akin, Open Forum, Catholic Answers Live, right after this.
Call us now with your question on Catholic Answers Live.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
He is honored by the Church as a saint with the title of the Angelic Doctor.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Thomas Aquinas wrote a basic textbook for young theology students that became the Church's most famous guide to the faith, the Summa Theologica. It helped him earn the title Doctor of the Church. He died in 1274.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. It's Open Forum, and Jimmy Akin, our guest, both hours. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884. We don't usually get quite as many calls as we are getting today from our own home state of California. We go now to Menifee, California. We're an anonymous caller watching on YouTube. Anonymous, you there with us?
Hello?
Hi, Anonymous. Go ahead with your
hello?
question. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, so I was wondering. Okay, so there's this show like Naruto. It's like a Japanese, or I don't know Japanese, but it's anime, and they're like ninjas, right? And they have like chakras, and they use like hand signs to do like activate their stuff, I guess, or like focus a certain part of their body, whatever.
They also run in a funny way.
like
I'm given to understand.
Yeah, it's cool. It's very funny. But so some of these hand signs are like, or not some. I'm pretty sure they are like Chinese astrology hand signs or whatever, and some like it's taken from like Buddhism, Hinduism, like apparently like I don't know the validity of this claim, this exact one, but like they were like the ninjas used to like do these like before they would do ninjutsus or whatever, whatever that is.
So Anonymous, I'm going to help you out just a little bit to get to a question here. It seems like, so you're watching this Japanese anime show. They use these hand signs that have to do with astrology and possibly other religions. I'm guessing that you're wondering, is it okay to watch this show if you are a Catholic person? Am I in the ballpark, Anonymous?
Yeah.
Okay, Jimmy.
And
go
other
ahead.
stuff like that, like other shows like that too.
Yeah, other shows of similar nature. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah. So one of the things I would be careful about here is this claim even accurate? That these are some kind of astrological or religious hand signs. I am unaware of. Now, I'm not an expert in Japanese astronomy or astrology, but I'm not aware of it involving any hand signs. Typically, cross-culturally, this is not just in Japan, but cross-culturally, when astrologers do their work, it involves their hands only to the extent that they're making calculations on paper. And it doesn't involve special gestures or anything like that. So I would want to, if it were me and I was interested in this question, I would want to check it out and see, is this even true or is this just an internet rumor? But let's suppose that there is some kind of special astrological significance that some of these hand signs have. Well, if that's the case, it may or may not be playing a role in this show. I mean, there are only a certain number of gestures that humans can do with their hands. And so consequently, different cultures assign different meanings to these. And just because a hand sign means one thing to one group of people doesn't mean that it has that same meaning every time it gets used. It may mean something completely different to some other group. And so even if there is some group of astrologers somewhere that has a bunch of hand signs that mean something to them, that doesn't mean that that's what it means in the context of this show. Even if it is, though, let's grant that one too. Let's say they do have astrological or religious significance in this show. That doesn't mean they have it to me. You know, I'm not a believer in Japanese astrology. I'm not a believer in Shintoism. So even if these characters are doing something that has religious or astrological significance, to the characters, well, I'm not one of those characters. I don't have to endorse what I see characters do in fiction. In fact, all fiction involves people doing things that they shouldn't, or it's boring because there needs to be dramatic tension. You need heroes and villains, and the heroes don't have to be perfect, and the heroes don't have to, because they live in an imaginary world, they don't have to all follow the rules that apply in the real world. I can imagine, well, what if God made the world differently so that these people could do whatever amazing, feats they are capable of, like running with their arms flailing behind their back so they can storm Area 51. I don't have to accept fantasy and apply the rules of our reality to it. So as a result of all that, I would say that it's not in principle to watch it wrong, to watch such depictions, because you don't have to endorse everything they're doing and say, oh yeah, we should do something like that in the real world. As long as you're capable of distinguishing fantasy from reality and saying, okay, that's not our world, we're not doing that, then it's not in principle wrong to watch this. Now, if it presents a temptation to you to want to do such things in the real world, like get into, other religions or get into weird occult practices or something, well, then you shouldn't watch it. But as long as you're secure in your faith and you're not being tempted to let fantasy spill over into your real life, then it's not in principle wrong. And that applies not just to this show, but other similar shows. If it creates a temptation for you, well, then avoid it. But if it doesn't, it's not wrong in principle.
Thanks, Anonymous. Appreciate the call. Appreciate it very much. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. The lines continue full, so we go now to Sandpoint, Idaho. Debbie, watching on YouTube in Sandpoint, Idaho. Your question, Debbie?
Yes, a gentleman named Ron White said back in the 1980s that he was directed by the Lord to a cave that he found the Ark of the Covenant in, along with other things like Goliath's sword and things of this nature.
Wow,
and
really?
I'm wondering if there's any fact in this. Yeah, I found it on YouTube, and it's a fantastic story, but and he says that the Israel government has covered up some of his findings.
Well, they would.
Yeah, I think you're
I'm just
saying
teasing.
that tongue-in-cheek, Si.
Yeah, I'm just teasing because, all right. So if Ron White says he found the Ark of the Covenant and Goliath's sword.
Okay.
You heard anything about this?
Not this specifically. There have been a lot of people who've claimed to find the Ark of the Covenant, and, so this is another one to add to the list. It's also very unlikely that it would be found in proximity to a sword that was known to be Goliath's.
Yeah.
I mean, this is much more, and there's a lot of antiquities fraud as it is, but this is much more likely to be something that is not true than something that is actually true. And the fact that, for those, the Israeli government won't let me show you the evidence. Okay, then what we have here is a case of the missing evidence. And the burden of proof, as far as I'm concerned, is always on the person who is making an amazing assertion in the absence of evidence. If someone's making an amazing assertion like I found the Ark of the Covenant or I found Goliath's sword, much less finding both of them in one place, then, okay, if you want me to believe that, the burden of proof is on you. And if you, for whatever reason, can't show me any evidence, then I'm going to be inclined to look at that skeptically and say, I think you're someone who's aware that the public has legs and is trying to pull one of them.
What do you think, Debbie?
I completely agree. I just wanted to get someone else to say it to me.
Yeah, I know that. I know exactly that feeling. Yeah, I need a reality check. That's what we call that, a reality check. All right, Debbie, thanks. Personally, I would hope they would find the hair of Goliath. Then you could make a wig out of it, and then you might have. Well, wasn't it his hair that gave him superpowers?
Samson.
Oh, Samson. Oh, I don't know what I was thinking. Oh man, that's embarrassing. Nick, why do you let me do it? You should hit the dump button when I'm going with the wrong guy.
David cut off Goliath's head.
I know, but it's a big
took
sword.
The hair with it.
I can't believe I confused Goliath with Samson. Well, it's a Thursday. When we come back to what's on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World this week? We got to take a quick break. If you're on the line, hang on the line. But now I'm going to find out what's on Mysterious World.
Okay, we're going to be talking about the Canadian priest Father Michel Rodrigue and doing an investigation of whether his dramatic revelations are actually true or not.
All right. You can trust Jimmy. He never would confuse Goliath and Samson. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum. Please, if you're on the line, stay on the line. If you haven't dialed yet, you can go ahead and try 888-318-7884. Open Forum means open to anyone, any question at all. Right back with more of that right after this. hope I didn't shame my family last hour, because my mom always listens when Jimmy's on, and I couldn't get Goliath and Samson straight. I mean, she's got, all those CCD classes dropping me off all those years, and I confused Goliath and Samson. Sorry, Mom. 888-318-7884 is our number. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, and it's open forum. And we've had several callers so far, not Catholic. If you're not Christian, if you don't think of yourself as anything, you're welcome to call if you've got a question about the Catholic faith, Catholic people, Catholic beliefs, or something maybe about philosophy or theology, and maybe a moral question. And when Jimmy's here, we'll expand that out, even if you want to know about some other mystery of the universe. 888-318-7884. Jimmy, thank you very much for relieving my embarrassment by saying Goliath probably had hair.
He probably did.
Yeah.
Most people do.
I appreciate you saying that during the break. I feel much better. Were you going to say something before I went to the phones?
Well, yeah, we had a call last hour from, I think it was William from Guyana, who was asking about private revelations. And I mentioned there was an episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World where I talked about the principles the church uses to evaluate those. And I just wanted to let him know that that's episode 84.
All right, William in Guyana. You can catch that on the internet. Jimmy Akin making the internet much better with Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Lots and lots of people finding, this is the kind of stuff that the internet is for. Fun, exciting, challenging, well-reasoned programs over there at Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. All right, every single line is full. That has just been the case every time Jimmy's been on lately. So I'm going to just keep marching forward. John in Fort Wayne, Indiana, listening on EWTN Radio. You are next, John. Your question for Jimmy.
Yeah. So I'll start off. I'm Protestant. So I had a big spiritual awakening through Campus Crusade for Christ, 4 Spiritual Laws, and Dr. Bill Bright, he endorsed Chuck Colson's work, Evangelicals and Catholics Together. So, I'm very open. One of the things, 20 years ago, I traveled to Germany and went to the Cologne Cathedral, and the Cologne Cathedral houses 3 crypts that are
the 3
by tradition, or it is the 3 wise men. But we only know that there were 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so, some scholars, like you alluded to with the Ark of the Covenant and Goliath's sword, that it's somewhat improbable that the bones could have made their way from wherever they were to be housed at the cathedral. And then we also don't know that there were 3 wise men. We sing the song at Christmas time, but there could have been 2.
So, John, just so that Jimmy can get going on an answer for you, your question is about do we really, whether or not we really take these to be the 3 wise men, or what is your question for Jimmy?
Is it extra biblical resources that we use to confirm that there were in fact just 3 wise men and that their bones are in the cathedral at Cologne?
Okay, great. Thank you, John.
Okay, so I am aware that, of this tradition that they have the bones of the 3 wise men in the cathedral in Cologne. In fact, my brother has even been there, and he also is not a Catholic, but he went there on a business trip and got to see them. I personally have not investigated this, but I can tell you what my position would be not having done any investigation. And not having done any investigation, I would think that this is a pious tradition, that they have the relics of the 3 wise men there, but I would be doubtful that it's an accurate tradition, because it seems quite unlikely that the 3 wise men's bodies would have been their names and identities would have been preserved apart from the Christian community, and their graves would have been marked, and then later Christians after their area, which presumably was like somewhere in the Middle East. It could have been Iraq, it could have been Iran, it could have been Jordan, it could have been Arabia, but it's somewhere over there. And the idea that their identities would be preserved long enough and their graves marked long enough, and that they had names that were unique to them and not like other people with similar names, such that it was easy for Christians to get their remains and take them to Europe in the Middle Ages, seems very implausible on its face. I'm not saying it couldn't be true. God can do amazing things, but my initial thought, not having done any research on this question, would be that it's improbable that it's actually there. And instead, this is kind of a cenotaph. A cenotaph is a place where even though someone's not really buried there, we still commemorate their memory there. And so even if it's not really the three wise men in the Cologne Cathedral, it can still be a valid place for Christians to go and commemorate the memory of the three wise men. In terms of the other question about the number of the wise men, well, we do have the three gifts mentioned in Scripture, and it's possible that each wise man brought one gift and there were three of them, but it's also possible it was some different number. The fact that Matthew uses the plural term for them in Greek, magoi, would indicate not just the singular magos, but he uses the plural, magoi, would tell us there were at least two. Could have been significantly more than that. In fact, probably there was a whole caravan of people who came, and it would have included the Magi as well as their attendants and servants and maybe some of their family. But the specific number of people in the caravan, because you didn't want to travel alone back then, especially over long distances, you could be victimized by bandits. You'd want to bring servants and guards and things like that if you're an important person. But how many people in the caravan were Magi, that's something we can only speculate about. 3 is not an unreasonable speculation, but it's far from being certain. And, John, if you'd like to hear more about what I think we can know about the Magi and what some of the different theories are about them, you might want to check out episode 75 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on the mysteries of the Magi.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. I just realized something, Jimmy. You probably have an Excel spreadsheet of the Mysterious World episodes.
I do.
Is that right? Because I was thinking you
got to keep them organized.
Yeah. Okay. 888-318-7884. Our number. It's open forum. What do you think, Nick? Let's take an early break, and we'll come back and get lots and lots of calls in with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live. I hope you have recovered from last week's Focus interview with a real-life exorcist. If you're still freaked out by that one, we started this week with an episode on blessings with Father Hugh Barber. That should help you feel better. But on Wednesday of this week, we have our most controversial episode ever. Here's the setup. Lots of Catholic media personalities have been suggesting that Pope Francis is a bad pope. So we got a bunch of clips from their shows, and we asked an expert on the papacy, what if they're right? We're not trying to pick a fight with anyone, but we got into some really frank discussions about what some of these well-known media personalities are saying. Catholic Answers Focus, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Watch it on YouTube or listen anytime at CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
The reason we pray is so that we can get to know and experience the love of God. The teaching of the Catechism is clear. The reason you were created is to know God. So the only way to get to know God is to spend time with Him. You can't fall in love with anybody unless you spend time with them. And when you go and you spend time with God, what you're going to get to know is that you're loved by God. And that's the deepest need in your heart. So make commitment every day to spend time with God so you can come to know His love.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Having fun. It's always fun when Jimmy is here. And always fun when the lines are full and we got lots of great questions and great calls. It's open forum today on Catholic Answers Live. You know what else is fun, Nick? I'm just okay. Yeah, I think he knows. Just a little hint for Nick. Jared,
birthday parties.
Yes, birthday parties are fun too. Yes, they have music at birthday parties, Nick. Birthday parties are so groovy.
And games and cake and sometimes pizza.
You know what? Yesterday, someone here in the office, Bernadette, said that yesterday was National Dessert Day. Is that correct? I didn't even know we had a National Dessert Day.
Brought to you by Big Dessert.
By Big Dessert, I know. So this is a bad year for me because I missed National Burrito Day, and now I've missed National Dessert Day. I'm having a tough year. Jared in Wichita, Kansas, listening on 96.7 EWTN Radio. You are next, Jared. Your question for Jimmy.
Man, you guys are making me hungry.
Sorry about that. I know. It's that time of the day, huh?
Yeah. So I just heard another radio program on the way home from work, and it just got me thinking. They were talking about Isaiah 11:9. It says, I guess, on my holy mountain there will be no harm because the earth will be filled with the joy and knowledge of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the mountain, and then my question was like, I believe it's Revelation. I don't know if I'm Catholic, so it could have just been a teaching as I grew up, but I think it says every valley will be filled and every hill lowered. So basically the earth is flat and you can see Jerusalem everywhere. I just wanted your take on the mountain being there too. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
So my take on this, by the way, every valley shall be exalted and every mountain and hill laid low. Apart from being found in Handel's Messiah, in one of my favorite pieces of Handel's Messiah, it's found elsewhere in the Bible, but where it comes from is Isaiah 40. So really what we're looking at is how do we understand two verses in Isaiah in relation to each other, one from Isaiah 9 and one from Isaiah 40. And I would say that both of them are meant to be taken in a prophetic sense that is not simply literal. If you look in Isaiah 40, and this prophecy, among other things, gets applied to John the Baptist because he's the messenger that comes to announce the coming of the Messiah. And you look in the broader context in Isaiah, and it's talking about making a highway for our God in the desert. So it's like the prophet is exhorting the people figuratively to make it easy for God to come to them. And he's picturing that in terms of a human journey. A human, in order to come to someone, needs a highway to make it easy for them. And to make it even easier, they want that highway to be level. They don't want it going down valleys and up mountains. So if you want to make a human journey as easy as possible, what you want to do is make a level highway and fill in those valleys and lower those mountains so that you can have a nice level highway, make it easy for the visiting dignitary to come to you. But in this case, the visiting dignitary is really God. And so this imagery shouldn't be taken literally because God doesn't need a highway. You know, God doesn't need a highway. He doesn't need a caravan. He doesn't need mountains. He doesn't need geography to be altered. He doesn't need a chariot. He doesn't, what does God need with a starship? He just doesn't need any of those things. So how should we understand this language? Well, we should understand it not as literal and physical, but as spiritual. We should fill in the valleys of our hearts and level the mountains of our hearts and make it easy for God to come to us spiritually by repenting and accepting his law for our lives, which is meant to make us happy. And that's how the prophet really wants people to get ready for the arrival of the Lord. It's by making a spiritual preparation. And so consequently, I don't think this passage from Isaiah 40 is meant to tell us anything about physical geography. It's meant to tell us about the states of our souls. And consequently, it wouldn't conflict with any particular view of what's going to happen with any particular physical mountain, like Mount Zion in Jerusalem. And similarly, when in Isaiah 11, when God says, "They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea," that's something that I don't know that it has particular implications for the physical Mount Zion or any other physical mount, because God's mountain is often used as a symbol itself. You have daughter Zion referred to in the Old Testament, elsewhere in Isaiah, as a matter of fact, and where you have Zion pictured as if it's a daughter. And Zion is frequently used as a symbol of something greater than just the physical mountain, and that may well be the case here in Isaiah 11 as well.
Jared, I hope that's helpful to you. Thank you so much for the question. 888-318-7884, our number here. Up next, we go to Canada. In Port Perry, Canada, is Sean, listening on EWTN Radio. Sean, your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy. I'm not a scholar like you. I'm just somebody who tries to be faithful to the church and learn what I can. And I'm confused about
That's the important
status
thing.
I'm confused about the status of 2 Peter, because in commentaries I've read, including Catholic ones, it says that Peter didn't write it and that it was written after his death. So why is it in the Bible?
Well, so I'll tell you the kind of the church's perspective on this, and then I'll tell you my perspective, which is compatible with the church's. The church's perspective is that who wrote a particular book is not determinative of whether or not it's scripture. The thing that determines whether a book is scripture is whether it's divinely inspired. And under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the church has recognized that the document we call 2 Peter is divinely inspired, and that's why it belongs in Scripture, because it's divinely inspired. Who wrote it is a very interesting question, but it's a historical question rather than a question of faith. So, we know it dates from very early in church history. It dates from the apostolic age. Authorship was considered, at least this is the argument of some scholars, authorship was more flexible in their day than it is in ours. Authorship attribution was somewhat more flexible. And so this could have been written by one of Peter's associates in the voice of Peter. And it could be considered, this is the argument, it could be considered by Peter even if he didn't actually compose the text himself. If it's written, by one of his associates in his honor to say what Peter would have said at this time, it can be considered Peter's letter even if he didn't personally author it. At least that's the claim. Now, my view is that it is actually by Peter. The evidence we have for that is noteworthy. Among other things, the fact he identifies himself as Simeon, not just Simon, but actually using the more Aramaic form Simeon, is noteworthy. That's something that a later person would not have thought to do, in all likelihood. Also, it makes express claims to really be by an eyewitness of the Transfiguration. And it specifically sets aside ideas of, following clever myths and stuff like that as like, I really saw this. And between that and even though the post-biblical traditions concerning Peter's authorship are a bit mixed, I think the balance of the evidence favors it really being written by Peter. But from the church's perspective, as long as it's divinely inspired, that's what makes it scripture, regardless of precisely who or when it was written.
What do you think, Sean?
Is there a Catholic Bible commentary that says, argues in favor of Peter's authorship of 2 Peter that you know of?
There are certainly some older ones that do, but in terms of ones that interact with more contemporary scholarship, there's a series that Mary Healy is a part of called I want to say Catholic Commentary on Sacred Scripture. It's currently coming out, and I think the volume on 2 Peter will probably cover both sides of the subject. Actually, what I'd recommend to you is not a specifically Catholic source, but there is a Protestant scholar named Daniel Wallace who has a set of introductions to the different books of the New Testament at Bible.org. And I remember reading his treatment of the authorship of 2 Peter, and I would recommend that. Also, I believe Craig Blomberg, another Protestant scholar, has a book on the historicity of the New Testament where he engages this argument. And then there's a classic introduction, again by a Protestant source named Donald Guthrie, called Introduction to the New Testament, who also would argue the traditional position. So actually, I would tend to recommend those just because I'm familiar with them. I know there are other Catholic commentaries that'll do it, but they're probably going to be a bit older and also harder to find.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate the call. Thank you so much. We go now to Charles in Kingwood, Texas, watching on YouTube. Hi, Charles.
Hello. So my question concerns acts of spiritual communion.
Okay.
So I know that it is a mortal sin to receive the sacrament of the Eucharist while in a state of mortal sin. So my question is it also a sin to, do an act of spiritual communion while in a state of mortal sin?
It is not. In fact, what an act of spiritual communion is different than sacramental communion. They are both acts of communion, but it is not sacramental communion. It is, as the name indicates, spiritual communion. And what you want to do if you are in a state of mortal sin, which has put you out of spiritual communion with Jesus, is you want to get back in to spiritual communion with Jesus. You want to return to a state of grace. You want to be back in that spiritual communion with him. Now, if you're already in spiritual communion with him, in other words, if you're not in mortal sin, you want to go deeper into spiritual communion with him, which means receiving even more of his grace. But if you're out of spiritual communion with him due to mortal sin, the first thing you want to do with Jesus is get back into it. And so it is entirely appropriate to ask Jesus to come into your heart and give you his grace and help you repent of sin and all that stuff.
Very good. I guess kind of as a short follow-up, so is there like a difference in effect in performing an act of spiritual communion when in a state of grace versus not in a state of grace?
The difference is going to the answer will vary depending on the situation. If you're in a state of mortal sin and you don't make an act of perfect contrition, then you may get some grace, but you won't actually be receiving sanctifying grace. On the other hand, if as part of your act of spiritual communion, you're making an act of perfect contrition, then you will receive sanctifying grace. You'll be back in a state of grace. Whereas, as I indicated, if you're already in a state of grace, you will receive more sanctifying grace. In terms of will you end up at a different point in terms of sanctifying grace, depending on where you started, either in mortal sin or not? Maybe, but maybe not. It's going to depend on God's will and also your act of devotion.
Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it. Open forum. We go now to David in Upper Arlington, Ohio, listening on 820 AM St. Gabriel Radio. David, your question for Jimmy Akin, please.
Yes. My brother told me that, or saw a video on internet about a rabbi that does not support, or that he says there's no direct evidence from the Bible that Jesus is from the line of David. And I asked someone else, and they said almost flippantly that, well, he's got the line from Joseph and Mary, but he never explained how. And I was wondering if Jimmy could go into more in-depth detail.
Okay, well, there are multiple places that in the New Testament that indicate that Jesus was of the line of David. That's why he's referred to multiple times as the son of David. I mean, just, go to BibleGateway.com and type in son of David and you'll get different results. Paul also is explicit about the fact that Jesus is descended from David according to the flesh, and he was legally descended from David by Joseph and presumably biologically descended from David by Mary. But we've got lots of evidence from the New Testament he was of the line of David. That's not in doubt among New Testament scholars that that's what the New Testament authors asserted.
Right back after this with Open Forum.
There's only one. Catholic Answers Live.
Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, is one of the most courageous leaders in the church, known for his outspoken support of unborn life, Orthodox faith and morals, and reforming Catholic institutions. In his groundbreaking new book, Light and Leaven, he offers a forthright perspective on the state of the church today and calls on the lay faithful to meet its challenges boldly. Touching on topics including parish renewal, the centrality of the Eucharist, the need for prayer and silence in a noisy and distracted age, and the battle between good and evil in the church and world, Bishop Strickland's wise insights and evident love for souls will inspire and edify you. To order your copy of Light and Leaven, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
How did you propose to your spouse?
Was it more traditional or a little creative?
That's what we'll talk about tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Very good job, Nicholas. Thank you for the groovy music. Appreciate it. Now Thursday feels complete. We've got the open forum, we got the Jimmy Akin, we got the groovy music. Thank you very much, Nick. 888-318-7884, our number here. Up next, I think we're going to Kyle. Yeah, Kyle in Tampa, Florida. You are next, Kyle. Your question, Kyle's watching on YouTube. Your question for Jimmy, Kyle.
Hi, first-time caller. I have a question. I was reading through the book of Acts, so it was chapter 15, and I remember seeing something about how there were some food restrictions on not eating meat that has been sacrificed to an idol, strangled, or not eating nor consuming blood. I'm not worried about any modern meat that has been strangled or sacrificed to idols, but I was thinking about the consumption of blood, because I know a lot of cultures, blood is used as a main ingredient, including Western cultures. Like in Ireland, it's used as blood sausage, or in Germany, I think they have some soups made of blood. I was just curious on the Church's stance on the consumption of blood or use of an ingredient.
So first let's do a little bit of exegesis, and then I'll get around to the Church's perspective on this. If you look in Acts chapter 15, we have the account of the Jerusalem Council, and the chief question at that point is, do Gentiles need to be circumcised and become Jews in order to be saved and be Christians? And the answer that is endorsed by all of the fathers of the council, including Paul, Barnabas, Peter, and James, is no, they don't. Gentiles do not need to become Jews, so they don't need to become circumcised. But James points out that there is an issue about how Gentile Christians and Jewish Christians will be getting along in the church together, because, as James says, Moses is preached in every city in the Jewish communities. And so if you have all these Gentile Christians behaving the way Gentiles ordinarily do, it could cause some scandal to Jewish Christians. And so what it gets proposed is to help Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians get along. Let's ask the Gentile Christians not to do certain things that would be particularly offensive to Jewish sensibilities, like eating meat that's been sacrificed to an idol, or drinking blood, or things like that. And so the council agrees. This is a pastoral provision to help Gentiles and Jews get along. But it doesn't mean that these are absolute and for always forever requirements. In fact, if you read, now the Council of Jerusalem happened about AD 49, but if you read Paul's letter to the Romans and his first letter to the Corinthians, which were written between about AD 53 and AD 55, so just, 4 years later, let's say, Paul is indicating that actually you can eat, in principle, you can eat anything you want. And he even cites meat that's been sacrificed to an idol as like, look, if you're over at some Gentile's house and they put idol meat in front of you, you can go ahead and eat it, provided you're not causing scandal to anybody by leading them into sin or thinking that idolatry is okay. And so Paul recognized that these provisions from the council in Acts 15 were pastoral in nature. They weren't absolute rules. And so consequently, we have to say, well, would there be anything intrinsically wrong with consuming blood? Well, we know that Jewish people couldn't ritually because blood had ritual significance, but even Jewish people would end up eating some blood cells, because when you butcher an animal, it's got millions and millions and millions and millions of blood cells in it, and you are never going to get them all out. No matter how long you leave it to drain, there's going to be some blood cells that are still in the animal's carcass. So when your butcher cuts it up and you take it home and boil it or bake it or fry it or whatever you do, there's going to be a little bit of blood in there. And God always knew that. And there's nothing in principle wrong on a human nature level with consuming the blood of something. This was a ritual element of God's covenant with the Jewish people, but it doesn't apply to Gentiles. And so consequently, the church has not told people, and it's had 2,000 years to do this, but the church has not told people in different cultures, like in the British Isles where they have blood sausage, or over in Asia where blood is used in some soups, or in other parts of the world. There have been Christians there for a long, long, long time, and the church has never said, knock it off with the blood. This is recognized that this is something that had ritual significance in the Jewish community, but Christians are not bound by this today.
You know what? I'm going to leave that there. I hope that was helpful to you, Kyle. But man, lines continue to stay full, so I'm going to keep moving, and we'll go to Chris in Seattle, Washington, watching on YouTube. Chris, your question for Jimmy.
Hey, gentlemen. Good afternoon. My question for Jimmy is, a couple weeks ago I called in asking about the contingency argument, and you shared how that points to a God in general. I guess my question today is following the line of the contingency argument. It seems the contingency argument points to something necessarily existing. So I guess why can't we say the cosmos is that necessary foundation? And I guess how does that point towards a God over the cosmos being necessary?
Okay. The cosmos is made of many parts, and the various parts that we see are contingent given the philosophical meaning of that term, at least as I'm using the term. Something is contingent if it could be different than it is. And it could be different in bunches of different ways. It could, a given piece of matter, let's say, it could decay into another piece of matter. You could have you have protons and neutrons turning into each other all the time due to the nuclear forces that are at work. It can be in one location rather than another location. It could fall apart into its constituent quarks. Even a given proton or neutron is contingent in a bunch of different ways. And the contingency argument proposes that you can't have an infinite regress of contingent things because you end up with no ultimate explanation then. I could talk about, how like the strong and the weak nuclear forces govern the way that quarks interact to produce protons and neutrons, but the current understanding of these forces is itself contingent, or at least is presumed to be. You could say, well, then there's some deeper explanation that accounts for why these laws are the way they are, and physicists have hope of finding a deeper set of principles. But if there's no ultimate, absolute, non-contingent reality, then you're just offering one explanation after another, and there's no end, and thus nothing gets ultimately explained. So the contingency argument, as I propose it, means that there needs to be some ultimate explanation that is non-contingent or absolute, meaning it could not be different than it is. And that's what a necessary entity would be. And since if you look at the universe and its parts, it clearly could be different than it is, that shows us the universe is not that ultimate necessary absolute entity. And so there has to be an ultimate absolute necessary entity that is beyond the universe itself, or that is not identical with the universe itself. Now, that doesn't tell us a lot about this entity. It doesn't tell us whether it's a person, for example. That's a piece of information that needs to be filled in by other arguments for God's existence. But we can show by the contingency argument that the universe depends on something that is necessary or absolute or non-contingent, however you want to say it, and that provides the ultimate explanation for the universe. And so consequently, the explanation for the universe is a basic definition for God, and consequently, the contingency argument points to the existence of an entity that is necessary and that can be meaningfully called God, but we still need to learn more about God by using other arguments.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you,
no
Chris.
problem.
I didn't know. Am I allowed to have a...
Go ahead, Chris. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to follow up, but how do we know that the universe could be different? Seems like that's what...
Well, okay. Let's see. I have a can of orange Zevia in my right hand, and if I move it to my left hand, then the universe is now different. So the universe can be different as I and is different as I pass the can of orange Zevia from one hand to another. This is a little bit like an argument that was made in the 19th or 20th century against the idealism that had been proposed by some 19th century philosophers that said all matter is an illusion. And I think it was the philosopher G.E. Moore who kicked a rock and said, "I refute it thusly." So just we can see that things in the universe are contingent just by performing little bitty experiments in pieces of the universe.
Chris, got to leave it there. Thank you very much. Look forward to your call again as you continue to work these things out. We'll take a quick break and be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin.
Your questions, Catholic Answers, live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Go forth and preach the good news. It's not just a suggestion. If you want to take more seriously the command of Jesus to share the gospel with those around you, consider joining St. Paul Street Evangelization. It's a grassroots organization that brings the Catholic faith to the streets in a non-confrontational way. Visit our website, www.streetevangelization.com, to learn more. And don't forget to like us on Facebook. It's time to do our part.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Once you lose faith, if somebody does something to you and hurts you 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, St. Peter thought 7 was a good number. How often should I forgive my brother, Lord? 7 times? My Lord said, no. 70 times, 7 times a day.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, open forum with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy, you wanted to go back to something you just said.
Yeah, it was. I was conflating 2 different stories. It was Samuel Johnson who kicked the rock to refute Bishop Berkeley's idealism. G.E. Moore did something very similar, though, who was dealing with epistemological or knowledge-based skepticism about the external world, and he said, "Well, here is one hand." And here is another hand. Therefore, there are at least 2 objects in the external world. And so, again, practical philosophical demonstration.
Let's go now to, where am I going? Keith in Morrisville, Pennsylvania, watching on Catholic.com. Hey, Keith, thanks for being with us. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Okay, so my question is, at the wedding of Cana, Mary says to Jesus, they have no wine. And then Jesus' response is, woman, how does your concern affect me? I'm curious if you could explain, how is that not like a rude response on the part of Jesus?
It sounds rude in English because we don't typically talk to women, especially our mothers, by saying, woman, this or that. But to be frank, this is not a great translation. This is one of the cases where even though the word in Greek is literally woman, it conveys a misleading impression when you just translate it that way. It's kind of like, in English, if I say we've got a dignitary coming, we need to roll out the red carpet for him. If you translate that literally into Spanish, it will not have the same meaning, because roll out the red carpet has different connotations in English than it does in Spanish. Well, this is kind of the same thing. In Aramaic and in Greek, the word woman is a perfectly respectful use of the way of referring to women. They have in Greek, which is the language John's Gospel is written in, a special form of the noun where you take a noun and you turn it into a direct address for someone. It's called the vocative case. And that's what he's doing here. He's got the word for woman in the vocative case to make it a direct address, and it's perfectly respectful. Just like, and it's equally respectful if you say man to somebody. But because we don't tend to talk this way in English, we don't tend to use the word woman as a respectful form of address in English, it would actually convey the sense better if it was translated lady or madam.
Yeah.
And a lady or a madam is the same thing as a woman, but it sounds more respectful in English. And that's the case when Jesus is using it. In fact, I've written about this before. I've written about it more than once, but if you Google Jimmy Akin and Mary and woman in this verse, you'll find some articles, and there's more than one, but there's one that's actually quite long that I did where I talk about all of the different ways that Jesus and other people in the New Testament use both woman and man when they're referring to people as a form of direct address. And it's really clear that they're being respectful. This is not disrespectful at all. In fact, the piece that you really want to see is called "Was Jesus Dissing His Mother When He Called Her Woman?" So Google Jimmy Akin dissing woman and mother, and that article should come up. And I show you lots of other biblical examples where you can see that this was just a common way that people talk to each other at this time, and it was not meant to be disrespectful.
Thanks, Keith. Hope that was helpful. We go now to Hollywood, Florida. Edward, watching on YouTube in Hollywood, Florida. You are next. Your question for Jimmy. No? Edward? All right, I'm going to come back to you, Edward. We'll see who else we got here that we can go to real quick. Let's go to Vincent in, really? Pequannock, New Jersey, watching on YouTube. I'm going to say Pequannock. I bet I got that wrong. Vincent, are you there with us?
It's Pequannock, but
yeah, that's what I
how
meant.
the phone say it.
Yes.
Yeah. So my question is, the keys that Jesus gave to Peter, how do we know that's succeeded between popes and not just something that was given to Peter specifically?
I would cite three principal lines of evidence. First, if you look at the Old Testament background for this usage of the keys, there's only one passage that plausibly forms the background, and that's in Isaiah. And in Isaiah, so in the time of David, you had and subsequently in David's kingdom, you had, in addition to the king himself of the line of David, you had an official who was the master of the palace that ran the palace on behalf of the king. Because the king is attending to other things, you need someone to take care of business on his behalf. And that figure had a key as the symbol of his office that he would carry in a little pouch on his shoulder. And in Isaiah, God has become displeased with one of the masters of the palace, or key masters, if you want to call them that, and is transferring the office to another. So it's passing from a man named Eliakim to a man named Shebna. And God says, I'm going to put the key on his shoulder, and he's going to be the new master of the palace. Well, that's the background. That's the only Old Testament passage that plausibly forms background to what Jesus says to Peter. And so Jesus, as the new David, is making Peter the new master of the palace. But if you think about the original office of the master of the palace, or chief steward, it's sometimes called, it was a successive office because there was an ongoing need for someone to do business on behalf of the king. If the king's off fighting a war or something, someone needs to run the palace. Well, is that going to apply to Peter and his line? Well, yeah, because if Jesus is off in heaven, interceding for us with God, someone needs to govern the church on earth. And so we would expect, just like there were a succession of masters of the palaces in David's original kingdom, we would expect there to be a succession of successors to Peter in the kingdom of the new David, in the kingdom of Christ. Also, there's just the practical need. If Jesus deemed that even when the church was, this tiny, it only had these 12 leaders, and it still needed a central leader who was Peter. Well, as it grows to become 1 billion people, it's going to need leadership even more. So consequently, we would expect that if you need one guy to coordinate the other 12 apostles, you're going to need one guy to coordinate all of the other bishops when there's 2,000 of them or 4,000 of them. And so we would expect, just based on reason, for an instituted office of this is the central leader to continue after the first occupant of that office. Then finally, for the third piece, so I've appealed to the Bible, I've appealed to reason, and now for the third piece of evidence, that's how tradition has understood it. And so the Holy Spirit guided the church in the recognition of the fact that the Bishop of Rome is the successor of Peter in a special way. And then if we want to add, for those who would count this as evidence, a fourth category of evidence, that's what the church ended up infallibly defining too. So we have a variety of lines of evidence indicating that Peter's office wasn't just for himself.
Vincent, thanks. I'm going to leave it there just because I really want to try to get to as many as we can before we end. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Brian in Pennsylvania watching on YouTube is next. Brian, you there with us?
Yes.
Hi, Brian. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, how are you? By the way, I like your guys' show. It's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. So my question is, I heard this concept that from someone that by virtue of our baptism, we literally become Jesus. And it made sense at the time, but at the same time, it seems a little too far. You know, I asked 3 priests about this, and the one priest said, nah, that's a dangerous concept. The other one says, no, we're brothers and sisters of Christ, but we're not really Jesus. And the other one said,
Let me cut to the chase because I know we're trying to get to as many as we can before the end of the hour. We do not literally become Jesus when we're baptized. If we literally became Jesus, then we would, among other things, be able to raise the dead or multiply loaves and fishes. So if you want a proof that you're not Jesus, go into your kitchen, get a piece of bread, and try to multiply it so that you have thousands of pieces of bread. If you're Jesus, you'll be able to do that. If you're not able to do it, you're not Jesus. Now, we do become members of Jesus's mystical body, and so we're linked to him spiritually and mystically, but we don't literally become him.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Good. Thank you, Brian. Thanks
Okay.
very much. Let's go to Bobby in Rome, Georgia, also watching on YouTube. Unbelievably busy day on YouTube today. Go ahead with your question.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Hi, Bobby.
My question is about in the Gospel of Matthew, it starts with the genealogy of Jesus, and it goes through all the generations, and it ends with Joseph, who's Jesus' foster father. My question is, why didn't the genealogy end with Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, when Joseph had no blood relation to Jesus?
Because what Matthew is trying to do is establish Jesus's legal claim to be the Messiah, and legal inheritance passed through the father rather than the mother. And so consequently, it's because he's the foster son of Jesus that he has a legal claim on the throne of David as the son of David. That wouldn't have been passed through his mother.
Okay, so it doesn't matter that he's not a blood relative of King David in that sense.
Well, presumably he is, but the blood relation is through Mary.
And how did that relation, I mean, sorry if it's too much, but how did that relation come from Mary?
Well, Mary was from the village of Nazareth, and like lots of people in the village of Nazareth, lots of them were descended from David. This was a very small place. Villages were very tight-knit and had lots of marriage between the citizens of the village. And so Mary, even though we don't know exactly the line that Mary had this, we are told by Paul that Christ is descended from David according to the flesh. Jesus took flesh from Mary. She was a member of this same village that had a high population of Davidites. And so consequently, it would seem that that he did derive inheritance from David according to the flesh, but legally through Joseph.
Bobby, thanks. Appreciate that. I hope that was helpful to you. Jimmy Akin, our guest, is also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And before we go, Jimmy, I want to ask you again about tomorrow's. You're doing tomorrow. The program that will drop has to do with a Canadian priest you were mentioning.
Yes, his name is Father Michel Rodrigue. He has been making really, really, really dramatic prophecies about what's going to be happening in the very near future that has alarmed a lot of people. And so we're going to be looking at whether his prophecies are credible or not.
Oh, okay. Can you give me an example of like what kind of things is he saying? Or would you rather just
I'm happy to. World War III starting imminently, for example. A nuclear war, also illumination of conscience, reign of the Antichrist, the martyrdom of both Pope Francis and Pope Benedict, and an ecumenical council attempt that doesn't quite work, it seems.
So when you said dramatic, you meant dramatic.
Yes, I did.
That is some dramatic stuff. All right, Jimmy. Thanks. I got to spend a lot of time with you this week. We got to record some stuff that hasn't aired yet as well. So it's always good to get to be on the air with you, Jimmy. Thanks very much.
Thank you. A lot of fun.
Jimmy's latest book is The Bible is a Catholic Book. You can get that and all his other books over at shop.catholic.com. Tomorrow, 2 hours with our good friend Carla Roussard. We're going to talk about purgatory, because he's got the new book on purgatory and a whole bunch of other stuff. Hope you'll join us then when we'll be here, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.